Writers, we are all very well aware that there are very few places these days that are taking the reins and really helping with the development process for new musical theater. And since the pandemic began, it seems that there are fewer and fewer every single day, which is why I'm thrilled to have connected with today's guest and the organization he spearheads, the Manhattan Musical Theater Lab, whose mission is to identify and promote new musical theater creators, serving as an incubator for the development, fostering, and progression of their work. So please, everyone, welcome to the show, the president and general director of the Manhattan Musical Theater Lab, James Rodgers. James,
Hi, Michael.
welcome.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing these days?
Very good, thanks. Very good.
Beautiful. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all you do, and we're all going to learn more about that in a second. But thank you for taking the time today to be here, talk about the organization, and you know, this thing that we do called musical theater development. Wild. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, how you identify as an artist, how you got here?
Well, I came to the US originally because I studied at the Manhattan School of Music. So
Mm.
my background is in opera, actually. And so I trained both in New Zealand and at the Manhattan School of Music in a master's degree for 9 years as a singer. And obviously, that was pretty involved and um, an incredible time and an incredible place to start, really, beyond my sort of high school. Like many of us in this business, I started out in high school listening and singing along to musical theatre soundtracks
Hmm.
while I was mowing the lawns for my parents. And then what happened was I discovered the classical singing voice. A teacher of mine in high school had thought, look, even if you wanted to be a musical theatre singer, you should learn a classical technique. Like it's going to put
Yeah.
you in a good spot. So I went to the New Zealand School of Music first. And while there, really just fell hook, line, and sinker for the art form of opera, primarily because the voice is kind of my obsession. I think my original obsession is the singing voice. And so when I heard singing like that, I just couldn't really walk away from it. It's a whole, when you hear a singer for the first time fill a 3,000 seat theater with no amplification, I mean, there's something about that you just can't, if you like singing, there's something about it that sort of blows you away. So I really went down the operatic route and wholeheartedly kind of invested my life in that. And it wasn't until I came to the Manhattan School of Music where I had made sort of a general plan that I would come to the Manhattan School of Music and learn about the American opera scene. And obviously, the Metropolitan Opera is a big deal. And
But of course.
and so then I would go, like many of my countrymen, I'm from New Zealand originally, obviously. I would go to the UK and then try and build a career out of London and so forth. I fell in love with a woman in my first year here, which sort of helped me stay in New York. But I also, what I discovered when I got here was I'd known peripherally about Sondheim,
Mm.
but I hadn't really understood the depth of what Sondheim had done. So that was the first thing that happened, which sort of reintroduced me into musical theatre in a different way. It wasn't about the British invasion of Lloyd Webber, and
Right.
it wasn't about Les Mis. It was about this other, what felt like, for lack of a better term, more serious musical theatre.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was fascinating. And then I discovered Stephen Schwartz, who I did not really
Mhm.
know anything except for a little bit of Godspell. I knew some of
Wow.
the songs, but I didn't know a lot about Stephen Schwartz's stuff.
Sure.
Um, and I also discovered people like, Adam Gettle, works like Next to Normal, things that were happening or had just happened in New York. I came in 2005, so it was like a very exciting time in that sort of world. I saw like the Piazza in the
Mm.
original production at Lincoln Center. And so there was a lot of that type of work happening.
Yeah.
And obviously Jason Robert Brown also. So I then thought, wow, this is a really interesting art form that I want to be a part of. And so I kind of had this in conjunction career happening as I left the Manhattan School of Music. I did some things in opera, but I was always had a hand in some musical theatre elements in my career as a performer, and realized that it was something I wanted to continue. So I was that guy who was, for New Zealand National Opera Company, I was singing Anthony and Sweeney Todd, So
Yeah.
for the opera company, I was being the musical theatre sort of guy. And that sort of is what led me into this real passion for, what musical theatre can bring, and how much creative output is happening in the space now. It's sort of unbelievable. And it's just a really exciting time. And obviously, being based in New York, you get to be at the center of so much concentration of that. And so that sort of led me into a real passion and love for musical theatre as an art form, on top of my love for the opera. So I probably split my theatre going like 50-50 between these two things.
That's pretty good though. I wish I saw more opera. The I love though that the way into musical theater, it feels very universal, especially for people perhaps closer to our age, where it's high school, it's classical vocal techniques, and eventually the introduction to Sondheim, and then the door that opens because of that. There's something delightfully universal about that, even though I'm sure your experience growing up in New Zealand was different from mine here in New York or other people in other countries, other parts of the US. But there's something so delightfully universal about that.
Yeah. Well, it is a progression, isn't it? I think like musical theatre is the child of opera. So it would never have existed if we hadn't have had opera first. So it's sort of an obvious pathway as a learning person to see the basis of what it becomes, and how now it's obviously all these genres are very broad, but I think there is a real through line there, and it's nice for us to experience that as artists, I think, because the history of where it came from is critical. And in my opinion, most of the really successful musical theatre has some root in everything that came before it, And so I think that if you know all the way back, it's very helpful to sort of assess and understand what the art form can be.
Absolutely. I mean, just for myself, as a composer, I have used opera as like a foundation for new understandings of storytelling through music that I kind of wish more people would do that exploration. But even in a light way, just for an example for the audience, like the idea of leitmotif.
Mm.
Leitmotif is very important, and bringing it into musical theater really helps cohesion happen across your scores, bring subconscious awareness to the audience of the importance of certain characters or ideas or places or story elements. And that's just like one little example of something you can take from opera. I also personally tend to write for people who have classical training in their voices. So I'm always a fan of when people bring those elements in as well, but I know not everyone does. It's interesting though that we're having the conversation about the gap, or not so much the gap, but the transition from opera into eventually what became musical theater. Because didn't Pirates of Penzance just open on Broadway last night?
Yeah, you're right, exactly. Yeah.
And that's interesting. Also, I hear that they rearranged whole bunches of the score to add different influences in that are very musical theater influences.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, it's those things of like, I mean, they're a classic example, right? Gilbert and Sullivan, because they were writing for their time.
Yeah.
And so, people often say this about like Mozart, right? This person was just a creative spirit, and they were writing for the resources that they had. And in fact, Mozart was writing for resources he didn't even have, because he was so forward thinking, and many of the things couldn't be played. But I think that they would want the piece to be changed for a modern audience, so that where the comedy lies sits in the current environment. And I think there's sort of some reverence for that, which I think I've never really agreed with that. I think you have to understand the original form and the original environment, but then the adaptation of it into a modern world is exactly what they would want. They would want it to be relevant. They
Wow.
wouldn't, I don't think Mozart today would be writing the same music that he wrote then, you know. It would be
No.
completely different. He might not even be in the genres that he was in, you know. So
True.
that's the way creative spirits are. They just you know, they move towards what's available. It's like there was an interesting period of time in literature when the printing press was invented. There was a massive surge in literary creativity, which
Hmm.
previously had been in architecture, because architecture was the thing that you could present to the most people. If you built Notre Dame, you got most people saw that. It was the biggest way you could
Yeah.
influence society, right? And then the printing press changed everything. And you could
Everything.
write
Yeah.
a paragraph and send it out to hundreds and thousands of people. And so I think it's the right way to go. If you're going to do pirates now, do it for this audience.
Yeah.
Don't be too reverent about it. Be irreverent. It is irreverent. It
Right.
is
It, at its
inherently irreverent.
core.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, well, I know we're not here to talk about revivals, but I'm sure that would be a fun conversation to have with you. I think that'd be very interesting.
Hmm.
But
But
instead, here we are talking about new musical theater works, and specifically the Manhattan Musical Theater Lab. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about what MMTL is? What's a bit of the background? How did we get to the organization and in its current form? Because I know that things have shifted.
yeah, it's an interesting backstory. So the organization was originally founded by a theatre director and choreographer named Bick Goss. Bick was it started life as a performer. It was a Bob Fosse dancer. And in '99, Bick formed what they called Musical Mondays. And essentially what it was um, developmental workshops that they did on Mondays, because that's when all of the people were available to actually do it, as we know, most of the time. And so what was interesting about that was that he formed in that period with that original team of people an interesting framework, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. But
Mhm.
essentially, they did a lot of things through that period of time. Bick died in 2013. So for that 14-year span, they did you know, quite a lot of amazing work. And they had some incredible pieces, like Next to Normal had its original first reading um, with Musical Mondays, and you know, Robert Lopez and Jeff Marks, and there was all sorts of incredible people that worked in the space, both as performers as well as creators as well. So that's an interesting other avenue. But what happened was, after Bick's death in 2013, the board took over, and there was some shifts in terms of the leadership. And by the time I came to it in 2019, that had some issues. Basically, what happened was some of the board members had kind of come on board, but then had to leave town for other work, you know.
Sure.
And so they were, when I met them, and it was a board member at the time named Gwen Arment, as a woman, as a friend of mine that my wife was working with at the time. She's a director, also producer, um, and Gwen said to me, "Look, we're going to wind this thing up, we think, because the current board is just feeling like we don't have it in us to keep it going forward."
Yeah.
And they were sort of talking about other organizations they were going to, you know, maybe give the money to.
Hmm.
And they said, "Would you be interested?" At the time, I was the managing director of a theatre company upstate called the Mac Hayden Theatre.
Right.
And the artistic director and I were talking about developmental work, you know, and how we might be able to incorporate that. So that was part of this conversation. So I met with the board and essentially said to them, "Look, I'd be really keen to do this, but I think it needs a fresh set of eyes totally. And
Mm.
I would love the opportunity, but I'd love it as if I can build a new board. Um, this is an exciting thing for me to take over. It has a track record. There was a little bit of money that they had raised. It was in the, you know, in the bank and had just been sitting. And and so essentially the board, you know, I presented to the board what my ideas were, and then um, they agreed that would be great. And so I took over, and then it was 2020, and we all know what happens in 2020. So
Yes.
essentially, because basically my work at the at the theatre that I was the managing director of became very intense during that period of 2020 and 2021 and
Sure.
2022. And also, we couldn't really do anything. You know, the Manhattan Musical Theatre Lab couldn't do anything.
Right.
Um, we what I did was I used the time to really examine what there was out there already. Because one thing I was determined to do was not to become another version of what already exists in New York. New York is very well served in certain avenues, right? There are a lot of opportunities for, cabaret opportunities, for one-off workshop opportunities, for one-off developmental presentations that are very quick.
Yeah.
So I wanted to look around the space and see where the holes were.
Mm.
And what was interesting was that I went back, there was an original document created by Bick and those first people back in 1999. And it had this three-phase concept that they were wanting to execute. And so the first phase looked very much like what we would call, developmental workshop, a reading, a week-long workshop of a work. And then phase two, which they had ballparked like a year later, would be a semi-staged production.
Okay.
And then phase three would be basically an off-Broadway production that was produced by the Manhattan Musical Theatre Lab, or at the time, Musical Mondays. And I looked at that and I thought, that's a really smart and sort of what we know needs to happen. It's about a 3-year developmental process to get there, right? Because writers need time. So they can't just churn it out. And I thought, this is a smart framework. Let's build something around that concept, because that gets our root back to what Vic had originally envisioned, and that's the whole point of the nonprofit, right, is to follow on that. So I didn't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. That was a good idea. Unfortunately for MMTL, they never really got past that first year portion, right? And I think it's probably because of resources, the costs just escalate drastically. So essentially what happens is we build our framework around that idea of this 3 phases of engagement. And so what we have decided to do after looking around is that there are a lot of short-term
Folks, we seem to have been encountering a little issue here. We're gonna hold for James to return, hopefully. Double checking my connection here is good. If you are live with me and my connection isn't good, let me know. At the moment, it looks like it is here and it is that. So we'll give James a moment to hopefully return here. Live, right? We love theater because it's live, and live stream interviews are also indeed open to technical difficulties. There was, what show was it recently that had well, oh, it was maybe Happy Ending had a medical emergency. I believe it was one of the audience members, though I don't have confirmation on that. And theater's live, everyone. So what did they do? The performers sat down, they played a concert, like off the cuff, during the medical hold. If you haven't seen any of the clips of that, it is well worth checking out online. Uh, the songs were delightful. They were so randomly chosen. Darren Criss is just sitting there on guitar, and they're just making things up. They don't really even know the lyrics to things. We will hopefully get James back here in a moment. Oh no, his computer crashed. He'll be back in a second. Love it. In the meantime, yeah, what James is currently talking about here with the idea of the development process making a lot of sense to be in these 3 phases is, well, first of all, yes, boy, does it make sense to have three phases. Secondly, this idea of like development that we talk about is what he just called phase one, right? Where people get stuck. They get stuck in the development loop. They get stuck with readings over and over again. And like if you're being guided along the way on how to do the development, how the show is actually progressing, something like what MMTL is doing to help provide guidance, something like what I provide in the Musical Theater Writing Collective, then you can move past that phase and onto the next thing, which really should be one of those workshop production style productions or a first smaller production. Um, I'm so curious to hear more about what phases 2 and 3 look like now for MMTL, but that idea of heading toward that off-Broadway production, like, wow, yeah, that's a model that is probably less doable these days because of the way that off-Broadway has changed and developed since 1999. It's a very expensive thing to do now to put up an off-Broadway show. But I'm curious about what these faces are and what they sound like because, we got to plan the thing, we got to write the thing, begin doing all the different types of readings, get the show to where it needs to be, make the edits, do the deep revisions, get those presentations under us for feedback, do that first smaller production, workshop production style for small production, and then launch into those higher level productions, whether that's Lord Regional, off Broadway, or some other New York sort of production presentation. Um, all of that being hopefully on its way to wherever your show is built to land, which may or may not be Broadway. I mean, not every show is built to be a Broadway show. Some of them may actually be off-Broadway shows or off or touring shows or educational theater, but having this ability to have a direct pipeline across different phases for development, this is that we need that. We very much need that. I'm sure we will say more about that as James comes in. Also, if you are live with me here, friends, do feel free to ask questions of James in the chat or of me. I'm happy to toss questions in as we can. We still got a bit to talk about here for sure, but happy to answer things along the way. And let me just check to see where we're at here. Live theater. Okay, it says he's jumping back in now. Hopefully that happens here. Great. Beautiful. All right. So he'll be back in a second. Oh, what can I do? A tap number? I don't have one written, but I'm sure I can make one up. I had to learn how to tap for a show. And I can't say that I'm a particularly good tapper, but I did have to learn how to do that. Learning skills for shows, something I was asked to do a lot, and now I have less skills, so I can't complain about it. But do be aware of that, writers, as you're writing your shows. Make sure you keep an eye on what skills your cast members have to have in order to play certain roles. Currently writing a show that requires actor musicians as well as dancer actors, and it's interesting having to keep an eye on, okay, what are the skill levels? And how are we going to make this work for people? Where can we build in flexibility? So if people maybe play one instrument, but not the one that was originally assigned, they can shift over potentially. How do we maintain the sound? It's an interesting challenge. I had to learn how to play guitar for a show, and I'm glad I now know how. Again, can't say I'm great at guitar, but that was fun. That was interesting. And here's James. James, welcome back.
Michael, I'm so sorry. I don't know what my computer just couldn't handle the conversation about musical theater anymore.
Uh,
It said no.
Well, I'm so glad that you're back. Welcome. I kept them entertained, don't you worry.
I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did.
You were in the middle of talking about the phases, the different phases, and
Yeah.
how
So
that functioned.
we got this idea was really a rebranding and a reconstruction of the original vision of the
Hmm.
of what it would be. And it fit in perfectly for us because what we saw was missing, and and I and I still believe this to be very, very true, is invested long-term opportunities for writers that have a long lead time
Yeah.
and that are very focused on what their needs are for the particular work that they're wanting to develop.
Yes.
And so this three-phase model allows us to really be a supportive system around what writers need. And so essentially what we've done is the first problem that we wanted to solve is, okay, it's very annoying when everybody turns up for the reading and the first day is basically just orienting like a first day of rehearsal, like it's always just everybody's just sort of meeting each other and it's all there's sort of the like, what is this going to be and where's the materials?
Yep.
What we decided we would do is have about 6 weeks before we actually do the 2 week workshop, we'll have a table read with all the same
Right.
people. And so we bring in the cast that we've assembled, we bring in the creatives that we've assembled with the writers, and we let the writers just hear it through once.
Hmm.
We let them hear the music however we can represent it if we need to, if they feel that's something that's helpful for them. And otherwise they just get to sort of see the architecture of what they've already created.
Yeah.
Then they have 6 weeks before they actually get in the room to do the developmental process. So they can, for that 6 weeks, examine, okay, what's our priority here? What do we think is absolutely humming along? And what do we think really needs some focused work? Working with the director and the music director to try to help establish that pathway. Because I think the 2 weeks can fly by and you've got this crew of people sitting around, you spend
Mm-hmm.
a fortune, you're not using them because you haven't pre-planned exactly what it looks like. And that happens, I think, a lot of times because it's very hard to know and anticipate what it's going to be like until you see that first read through. So we wanted to eliminate the first read through from the 2 weeks. So we preserve a day of the 2 weeks and we really get 2 weeks of process.
Right.
The 2 weeks was critical because one is not enough. One
Agreed.
is just, you sort of just get a taste of what's going on and then it's over. So we really are determined to get to 2 weeks. And the third part of it that we found was really important is we didn't want there to be a performance pressure on the workshop because the presentation of the thing, which is a baby, a tiny little baby, doesn't need the pressure of having to run a marathon in front of an audience that doesn't know really anything about what's going on in the room.
Yeah.
Because that discomfort or sometimes anxiety goes through everybody involved, including the performers. And so you've suddenly got actors who are they're egotistically driven because they're actors and that's the nature of being an actor and that you're trying to present something really well. Like that's what you do. That's why you're good at it, because you really care that people find you engaging and find the material that you're presenting engaging. And suddenly you've got actors who are freaking out because they don't know what producer might walk in the room on Friday and they don't feel like they know their lines well enough. And so what we're trying to do is bespoke the creative presentation so that we work that first week, we work with the writers and we really hone the work. The director and the music director aren't even thinking in the first week about what the presentation is going to be. That is my job as the artistic leader of our organization. Okay. I watch what is happening with the work and I think about, okay, what do I think is going to be interesting and best serve the piece to be presented at the end of the week, next week.
Okay.
And so that sort of takes the pressure off the director and the music director as well, and that they're not for that first week thinking about anything except for the work itself. Because, you know, you're putting together a 40-minute presentation of something that might be 2.5 hours long.
Right. Yeah.
But I want them thinking about the 2.5 hour long thing in that period of time, not about the 40-minute presentation. So then our model takes 2 days. We have 2 days off for the performers that are engaged. They have an actual weekend. And then we bring in the writers. For those 2 days, the writers have some time with the director and the music director to talk about what week 2 looks like. And then we start thinking, okay, what do we want to present again? So we've already had 5 days of working on it before we start to put that pressure on everybody. And then we try to put a framework together over those first couple of days of exactly what will happen on the Friday presentation. And when I say presentation, for this first phase, as we call it, it really is a small invited group of people. You know, it's just industry. What we're hoping to do is bring in industry professionals, producers, artistic leaders, directors who may have an interest in the piece's life beyond our involvement with it. So that is phase one, what we call phase one. And so the whole mission of it, the other thing about us, which is different from what the original Manhattan Musical Theatre Lab was, is that we're not interested in doing that full off-Broadway production ourselves. What we're trying to do is shepherd the piece into the hands of somebody who will. Because again, where is the gap? There's no gap in fully realized off-Broadway presentations by non-profit theaters, even in New York. There are a lot of organizations much bigger than us, much more equipped to produce a piece of theater than we are, who are doing that work already. And there's plenty of producers, especially, you know, in the kind of early parts of their careers, who have interest in producing work off-Broadway or off-Broadway. So what we're trying to do is shepherd the piece through to that stage where they will get interest. So this first part of it is about, just like it is with any other reading, giving some taste of what the work is going to be. And then what we hope to do is to develop the work into a second year. So that would be what we call phase two. Phase two is really a larger scale workshop with an actual semi-staged production, you know, sort of a little bit like what encores might do in a smaller scale, and that sometimes the books might be in hand because we just don't get in the rehearsal period we have.
A true workshop production feel.
It's a workshop production feel in a traditional sense of what you would expect it to be, you know. And so then we have an audience who can purchase tickets. We have maybe 5 performances in a theatre space. There's more components. There's a bit of lighting. It's not a lot, but it's a bit. It's enough to give us a concept of what it would be. There might be at that stage choreography introduced in a practical sense. There might be just as the developmental codes, you know, the equity codes kind of fill these guidelines. They know what they're doing. I mean, they invented these guidelines because people know what's required. So again, we're sort of bending the wheel slightly. We're not trying to break it. We're just bending it slightly, using what commercial theatre producers have been using for a long time to develop their work. And so that then is the sort of second part of our presentation of the work. There's a much longer developmental process, rehearsal process for that. And as I said, that happens 12 to 18 months after that first phase. So the writing team have had time. Ideally, they're working with the same director and they're getting that opportunity to really develop the piece through. And at that point, what our hope is that we try to hand it off. So our third year of involvement is really about championing the work into the hands of a regional producer, into the hands of a commercial producer in New York, or in major cities, internationally even, you know, as we were talking about in the preamble, like London is, you know, a considerably viable option to produce right now comparatively. And so that is the network that we are trying to build out, so that we have the resources and the connections to put this piece in front of the people that we think might be interested
Yeah.
in carrying it forward beyond that second year and into a major production. During that whole time, what we're hoping to do is to have a mentorship element to what we're doing.
Okay.
Right from the very beginning. So right now, the piece that we're producing later in the year, or presenting really later in the year, we're talking with the writers about when they feel like they might be ready with the work to actually put it in front of an established lyricist, an established book writer, an established musical theatre director, music directors. And then at that point, we will try to make connections there that are lasting beyond just, a single sort of, oh, I saw the walkthrough and here's my thoughts on it.
Yeah.
But rather, they get an opportunity to be truly mentored, and they have at least a couple of formalized meetings that we are responsible for, in the hopes that will turn into a lasting relationship for them as creators. So there's two things we did when we sat down with the writing team is, okay, who in your world would you love to show this to and get some feedback? Like, who are your heroes that you would love to get feedback from? And we will see if we can make that happen. We can't promise that we can get Stephen Schwartz to come in, but we can try, we can send him a message, and we feel like that is that is an easier avenue to those relationships for a lot of writers. It's a lot harder for a writer to cold write somebody who's established in the industry.
Yeah.
We feel like we can provide a little bit of a more robust outreach.
Yeah.
And our hope is that we build a network and relationships with those people so that those are lasting, and that we get our mentors to come back to mentor again. I think, the Maestro organization has a really interesting model that they have implemented around mentorship. And I am intimately seen it because my wife is a music director and she was involved with Maestro quite early on. And I think they've built a great example of how that can work and how it can benefit the community.
Mm-hmm.
And so we feel like that's another part that we can play as part of giving this, administrative infrastructure and collaboration, as well as championing to creative people, writers who have not yet established those connections on their own.
Yeah.
They know a lot of people, but they can't quite get that producer to give them $30,000 to do a workshop,
Right.
And so that is the baseline of the model of what we're doing. And as I said, the cost is prohibitive to do it at this level for most people. And that is our mission, is to really provide for an artist-driven piece what a producer would provide for a work that they are looking to create.
Yeah.
That type of initial framework. And so in terms of, what work we are looking for, what stage it is at, we don't have a guideline. We just have a lot of outreach into the community, looking for work, and we examine work, and then we meet with a writer or a writing team, and then we have a conversation, and then we see if we think it's right for us. And so there are, as I said before, plenty of opportunities to find that point of contact with writers in New York. I mean, Sam and Eliza, who we, are bringing in for the first piece this year, I saw them at a prospect presentation. Saw a piece that they wrote, a 10-minute musical, which was, to be honest, just absolutely stunning. If anyone wants to watch something really amazing, I don't know how it was captured online, but I'm sure they videoed it, because prospect videos these things. It was called Black Holes Like Donuts, and it was just that what they had done is they'd been given a photograph and they had to write a musical based on the photograph. That was the point of starting of creation that they were given, which is a great idea in some ways, because you sort of think, well, can they create from nothing?
Yeah.
And there were a lot of good pieces in that, as there always are with Prospect, but I thought that this just incredibly heartfelt work,
Yeah.
and so that has been right now our antennae are up, listening, and as you know, we've engaged with you in terms of the people that are involved with the work that you're doing, and that we are just looking to meet with writers and talk to them about their work and see, we have very few opportunities because the scale that we're targeting is quite a lot of investment.
Right. Yeah.
But we believe them to be very beneficial for the growth of the writers as well as the pieces themselves. And I think that's a big part of it for us too, is that we're not really invested in our work, we're invested in our creative spirit or a team of creators.
Yeah.
And so with Sam and Eliza, the question wasn't, can we produce debutantes for our workshop? Can we workshop this? The question was, what do you have that you would like to present? And they knew, the two of them looked at each other and knew straight away what it was. And so that's the type of sort of non-invasive environment creatively that we're trying to provide, which again, it's hard for artistic people. It's a huge lift to do a workshop.
Yes.
And so often you see creative people doing admin to make the workshop happen, and then they're doing the workshop, but it's hard for them to be really engaged because they're also worrying, okay, is the room booked? How do we break down the room? All of those things. So our objective in the practical sense is to take away that and just make it about writing, especially during that 2-week period. So what we are hoping to learn is how to facilitate that best and basically become experts at facilitating that process for any number of writing teams and any number of work, types of work that can happen. As we know, the musical theatre space is so diverse now in terms of its subject matter, in terms of the makeup of the shows, in terms of the scale. And so we want to be very malleable and able to provide a process that can benefit the writers and their piece primarily.
It very much just excites me as a writer, of course, the idea that someone out there is thinking about this, thinking how to fill this gap. Because it really is. It's that administrative piece for sure. It's the money raised piece. And it's the fact that workshops fell out of fashion only because of the expense, right? That we all want to do workshops of our pieces, but to gather people who have to set aside time in a space and make it happen, hiring the artistic folks, doing all of those other tasks along the way, having the money collected in order to do it's too much. And I see why a lot of companies have fallen off of doing them, because they are tricky to do unless your mission is surrounding the idea of workshop. And I think that that's what I'm thrilled by with MMTL, is that it truly feels like a foster process. It is hey, we like what you do. Let's give you time. Let's give you space. Let's give you mentorship and guidance. Then we're going to hit this first presentation moment. But even then, it's about the writing first, then we'll talk about the presentation. Then coming around into that second phase with the idea of being able to have a workshop production with multiple performances, get some more industry folks in, and hopefully pass that off. I would be hard-pressed to name another institution doing that. So I'm a big fan of what you are doing here in your mission.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, it's really gratifying to hear it because the scene is big and you worry you're going to miss things that are happening.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think, again, it's sort of the non-producer involvement. I think it's happening. What we're doing is happening a lot, but but it's happening inside production houses or production companies that are commercially based, focused, and that's great. But if you're not one of those writers who's happened to get the ear of a major producer and don't have that advocacy, or you have your own idea that you haven't been able to get the producer to buy into,
Yeah.
That's the key element that we feel like where it's not happening. And the question is like, one thing we ask ourselves when we're looking at work is it obviously commercially viable? So if it is, we're not really that interested in it, because we think if it's good and it's obviously commercially viable, there's a lot of producers out there who are going to jump at this idea. Like, this is not a new, this doesn't need to be filled. But if we look at it and we think, this work, like maybe Happy Ending would be an amazing example of this right now, that's so much in the zeitgeist, right? I don't think when you look at maybe Happy Ending, you think, oh, this is a commercial hit. This is no way, right? And what we're trying to do is give a platform to convince someone who is commercially motivated that a work that isn't obviously commercially viable could be, if it was given the right platform. And so I think that if we can just get one opportunity to happen, out of that, and it results in something going to the moon, it's worth it, because I think it's when we get those musicals that are artistically risky or commercially risky and artistically risky, when we get them to go, that's when we have masterwork can happen, and we all know those shows. The others that are 20 years old, we don't know so much, and so that is the key component that we sort of, as our large ambition is that we want to contribute to that possibility, and we know that's really hard to make happen, and we know it's not going to happen very often, but we want to give something that we think provides a good opportunity for it to happen.
And I think that's where our missions just so heavily align. It's like everything I'm providing is trying to help writers not have to shoulder the full burden on their own and be able to learn what they need to learn in order to create good quality work, like work we are excited to see. Is some of it going to be commercial and be easier to get produced? Absolutely. But a lot of the stuff I know people are writing in the community is not commercially, like the one you'd look at and go, ah, yes, a Broadway show. But it could be. It's like, who are we handing this off to? Where are we shepherding these people with these beautiful pieces once they're through the writing development process and ready for the presentation stages? And I'm thinking of ways over here to try to provide more opportunities a little earlier on in the process, like with the salon we just did a few weeks ago, with doing the concert that we did in February. But my resources are limited too. So it's nice to have a place where I can be like, great, MMTL, may I introduce you to, and let's see if that's a working thing. And if not, okay, but hopefully there will be other people taking up a similar mantle to what you're doing, because we need this. This is how we get that work that we all know and love so much seen initially.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the expertise of this tier of development is also a really unique skill. And I've seen it primarily in the opera work that I did as a performer, just in the room, and that you see some people, and he's probably not going to watch this, but Stephen Osgood is an example of this, who is currently the artistic director, I think that's his title, at Chautauqua Opera. Great conductor, worked with him quite a few times. He has a knack for developing work. He knows how to use the time. And it's not a skill that a writer necessarily knows, because why would they? It's just not something that comes into their scope of thinking most of the time as they write the work. So that's the other component that we think, if an organization is focused only on this, primarily on this, we're going to get better and better at being efficient on the writer's behalf,
Yes.
using that time and guiding the process. And that's another part of what we think can be really beneficial, is the expertise of that, like the dramaturg who really understands what it is for the 2 week workshop to be, what can be beneficial in that 2 week workshop, what is not worth tackling,
Yeah.
And so it's another aspect of the time is money equation, which is an unfortunate reality that we all have to live with.
Yeah.
Efficiency really matters, and it's not something that you know how to do unless you've done it. I mean, how can you anticipate unless it's something that you've had a lot of time working in? So that again couples, together nicely with the sort of ambition to provide a platform, but also provide an efficient platform and a guided platform for writers to work in.
Yeah. But the guidance is key. We
Mm.
need it. I mean, even as a writer who does coaching and dramaturgical work with my own pieces, I know what to do, but I'm so close to it.
Mm.
It is so much easier to have the feedback of other people, or to have literally just hire a dramaturg and just talk me through the piece, ask me the questions, hit me with the things that I'm not thinking about because I've got a depth of knowledge of 15 drafts before this draft.
Right.
And so for me, things are obvious, or they're getting missed, or, oh, I never even considered that, but I see why now, like we are, even if you know the the foundations of what you need to do in development, we're all way too close to our pieces.
Mm.
We need the outside eye.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
Ah,
Mm.
yes. This is so exciting. I
Oh,
think
of course, yeah, you say, yeah. Yeah, we're
think
excited.
I think the burning question on everyone's mind here is going to be what is MMTL looking for, and can they get involved with you in any way at this moment?
Yeah, I think so. One of the reasons that we've tackled this year light in terms of, we're just doing one workshop this year. Ultimately, what we hope to do is have 3 phase ones happening simultaneously each year.
Beautiful.
Not simultaneously, sorry, but each year. And
Mhm.
then in conjunction, a phase 2. So we're taking through one of the 3 into that phase 2.
Okay.
Um, Primarily just for, resources. If we had all the money in the world, we'd probably look to do more. But
Yeah.
and so I think what we're trying to do is really build relationships, and that is
Mhm.
in the writing community as well as in the creative community at large in terms of artistic leaders, producers, and so forth. So what we're really doing, whilst we're not taking submissions of work, what we are looking to do is meet writers, and at any opportunity we get, we want to go and see, salons, as an example, and engage with work that is at that, and it is in its infancy. I think, as I said before, the not obviously commercially viable component is something that is in the back of our minds
Yeah.
all the time. The second thing I think is that word infancy for the work. We are looking very early stage development. We're not looking at something that's really fully fleshed out.
Sure. Mhm.
But we're looking, so in a sense, we're looking, as I said earlier, for writers and composers, not pieces.
Yeah.
And so we want to see the pieces, but we don't necessarily want the pieces that we see. You know what I mean?
Heard.
And,
Yeah.
and so I think because I think that all writers, writers are not obtuse to the realities of the commercial world. And then I think some writers are driven in their creative process by that in the back of their minds. Like, can I sell this thing?
Yeah.
But what we would rather do, if we think there's something interesting for us, when we meet with the writer or where we see the work in a showcase type environment, and very early stage, few songs, or see a concept, then we want to hear from the writer, like, what would they really want to write if they had a
Mhm.
2 week workshop, in 12 months or 18 months?
Yeah.
Would this be the piece, or is there something else that you've got hatching that is
Sure.
more interesting to you that you're never going to get a workshop on normally? And that really is what happened with Sam and Eliza, for the debutantes, was exactly that. As I said before, we didn't I didn't want to build out the thing that I had seen because I thought it was perfect as it was. I
Mm.
wanted to see what they wanted to create. And then
Yeah,
they had this, I didn't know that they had this thing that was already kind of along on the way in terms of concept, but I don't know that they'd written a page of the book.
sure. Yeah.
I heard some of the songs um, but it was very early stages when we first started talking. So um, that's really our current model. And again, we're using this year to establish and to evaluate the selection of work.
Yeah.
We have another component that we're looking to add in the future, which will influence the selection process a little bit, which we
Mm.
haven't fully fleshed out yet. And that's being crafted at the moment. But essentially, I think info at manhattanmusicaltheatre.lab. If you're a writer and you want to have a conversation or you have a present happening, write to us, let us know. We really want to try to get along to it. We really would love to grab a coffee. Um, if you submit our script, we're not going to have time to read it. Like,
Right.
if you submit to us a script, we just don't have the resources to do that. But
Yeah.
we do want to talk to you, and we do want to engage and learn a bit more about what's happening in the writing community. So,
Yeah.
I would say to your watchers in your community, do not be afraid of reaching out to us. We want to have these conversations, um,
Beautiful.
and it's an important part for us. We're building for the long term
Yeah.
in terms of those connections. So
Yeah. And I think something also just to highlight for all the writers out there, I mean, my community members, they know this already, but I'll say it anyway. This idea of having other projects going on or that you take notes on, that you're letting percolate, that maybe you've dabbled in multiple projects at once. I say this all the time to writers, have multiple projects at once for so many reasons, not the least of which is when you hit your head against the wall for one, you can move on to a different one and work on that for any given day. But I think it also provides that permission for writers who are like thinking about this one piece that's in development and I want to make sure it's commercially viable, but then have the playground piece, have the one that you're like, yeah, I don't think anyone would ever produce this, but I really want to write it. And keep working on it, keep percolating on it because you never know when a company like MMTL shows up on the scene and says, "Hey, actually, those are the kinds of things we're interested in knowing about."
mm,
But you just never know. I think it's important for writers to always bear that in mind.
interesting. Yeah, really interesting. It must help, Michael, that too. Does one project feed another in that way, do you think, artistically, even from a writer's
To
perspective?
to an extent, I think so. Like, for instance, I do find that when okay, so we're on two very different projects right now in the writing phase. One of them is much deeper in the writing phase. We're in like deep second draft. It is a commercially viable piece. And whenever I meet with my collaborator on that piece and we write something, I always end up walking away with within the next 48 hours with more ideas on the piece that's in the percolation stage that I've had got a couple songs on. And I do think that creativity begets creativity. I think it's easier to take the excitement and cross it over into a different piece than to take the excitement and then immediately go and do work on that same piece again.
Right.
So
Interesting. Yeah.
it's a fascinating thing to consider. I don't know, but I think it's exciting when you're able to have the space and have the creative practice. We talk about that in the community a lot. Creative practice to be able to give your time and attention to multiple things at once. I
Mm,
know that not everyone has a life that's set up that way, but if you can sneak that in, I always suggest it to people.
yeah. Yeah.
So before we wrap up here, we're going to do a quick rapid fire of some questions. Before we do that, though, there are links to things in the description, everyone. Um, that being said, where should people go and look to learn more about MMTL and where can we follow you?
MMTL.org. is the place to start for sure. We're on Instagram and Facebook and getting more and more active there. And so engage with us there. Talk to us on social media. We're really trying to build that community so that it as an avenue of outreach.
To
And
be
I think
fair, everyone, we met via Facebook or an Instagram message.
Instagram,
So here we
exactly.
are.
Yeah. So also we, join our mailing list because we are actively going to be promoting and updating through our mailing list. And so yeah, just jump on our website. If you know people who want to contribute, either financially or their expertise, again, please reach out to us. We are right now just building our community, and we're really hoping that we can get a really big following of theatre lovers, theatre makers, and theatre performers, so that we have a big resource to pull from when it comes time to ramp up more projects in the new year or in the next year. And so please, yeah, if there's any and all are welcome to reach out and give us their insights, their thoughts, their connections, their ideas. This is what we're doing. We're very much, even though we've been around since 1999, we're really fledgling in our rebirth. So
Yeah.
we're open to everybody's input.
Yeah, now's an exciting time, friends. Get in on this now. Reach out, make the connection, be part of the community. And my viewers are community oriented anyway, so I'm sure some people will absolutely be hopping on this train. So, are you up for a little rapid fire, don't think too hard question set?
Right.
Take us home. All right, here we go. What musical theater writer's work do you gravitate toward the most?
On time. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep, heard.
Got so many.
What show made a tremendous impression on a younger James?
Younger James Lamers.
Mm.
Yeah, Lamers was the thing, really. I think like so many in my age group, it was just, that 10th anniversary recording that got
There we
played a lot
go.
in my house. I used to mow the lawns, and it would take me the entire album to finish the lawns. So I would be finishing off the final section. Do you hear the people sing?
Yes. That was a win for a lot of people, so you're definitely not alone there. What's your favorite non-theater related activity or hobby?
I'm an obsessed golfer.
Ooh.
I love golf. I find it to be, I got into it because it's a marvelous way to work on the act of singing while not singing.
Ooh, I like that.
Very
Oh, yeah.
similar thought process. So,
That's fascinating. Oh,
yeah.
I could have a whole conversation with you about that.
Mm.
Quick one, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Mm. Would you rather be on stage, backstage, or in the audience?
All of the above.
Ooh, okay, we'll take it. Would you rather see I think I know what the answer is, but would you rather see a new musical or a new interpretation of an old musical?
New musical.
Mm-hmm. Rodgers and Hammerstein or Lerner and Lowe?
Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Stephen Sondheim or Stephen Schwartz?
Even Sondheim.
And then last question, what's the best show you've seen recently?
Maybe happy ending. I just I couldn't talk. My wife and I went for dinner afterwards and we couldn't talk. We had no idea what we're getting ourselves into. We saw it in previews. And I just think Michael Arden's direction tops off what is also an incredible design.
Yeah.
And the piece has so much heart. And we were talking earlier about form. It has such form to it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's rooted in the history of our art form. And so I just found it to be, yeah, I was literally, my wife and I went for dinner and we couldn't talk for like 15 minutes. We were just we didn't know what to say because there was too much to say. Yeah, so I haven't seen many pieces better in my life, actually.
Wow, that is
So,
quite the recommendation.
yeah, I would get along to see it. I'm going to go and see it again for sure.
You heard
Get
it
a
here.
ticket. And it's going to go bananas. Hopefully, it does well in that little thing called the Tony Awards.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just love it. I just think it's so good.
Beautiful. Well, James, thank you so much for being here, sharing your time, your energy, and also your wonderful organization with us. I'm thrilled by everything you're doing, and I'm sure the community is as well.
Thanks a lot for having me. Yeah, it's been fun.
Absolutely. And everyone else, make sure to check out all those links, follow along, and help join in the community. And until the next time, friends, I hope you have a great couple of weeks. All right. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye. And we're out.
Okay.
Ah,
Thank
I
you
thought
so
that was
much.
great.